What is surveillance capitalism when you use that term, and how
Uh,
do we end it?
yeah, so there's competing definitions of this, right? The first place where it appeared, as far as anyone can tell, was this progressive journal published by these British Columbia academics, where they used it as a critique of capitalism itself. And then Shoshana Zuboff, who's a Harvard Business School professor, popularized a different sense of it. She popularized the idea that surveillance capitalism was a rogue capitalism. And by this, she meant that if the theory of capitalism is that a market aggregates all the choices that people make that reflect how much they want things and what they're willing to give up to get them, the marginal revolution that they call it, then produces these kind of efficient allocations by aggregating all that information and in a kind of self-ordering system, this invisible hand, then surveillance capitalism is rogue, because by gathering a lot of data on us through surveillance, big tech companies can influence us, can determine our behavior. So rather than making our behavior, rather than aggregating our free choices, these firms are able to influence our choice or determine our choice, so that we don't have the system that produces these allocations. And I wrote a little book. I used to have a copy next to my camera so I can hold it up. Oh, there it is. I wrote a little book called How to Destroy Surveillance Capitalism. That's a critique of this idea, because I think that the evidence that big tech can influence our choices through influence campaigns is pretty thin. Like the peer-reviewed evidence is that one study where Facebook exposed 60 million people to a message that they thought would make them vote. And then they found that across the 60 million people, about 200,000 or 300,000 more people than they expected to vote did go out and vote. That sounds impressive. Obviously, there are a lot of elections that have been carried on less than 200, 300,000 votes, but it was 0.36% of the people in the experiment, and they were spread out across all precincts. So there aren't any elections that have been won by a 0.36% margin. And we should probably expect that if you repeatedly expose someone to a stimulus, that it will become less effective, not more. I've got a little note by my camera here, because this is my garage, which is also my office, which is also the laundry room. And the note says, turn off the washing machine, because I don't hear it after the first 5 minutes. But of course, everyone else can hear it. And that's what all stimulus becomes, right? You stop noticing stimulus with repetition. So there's at least a pretty good idea that if the initial outing was 0.39%, that the second outing would be less impactful and less and less. The first banner ad had a 50% click-through rate, and it's significantly less than 1% today, right? So that evidence that it's actually working is pretty thin. The fact that Facebook conducted a experiment on 60 million people without their consent does militate for the idea that they shouldn't be running a lemonade stand, much less the social lives of 2.6 billion people. But it doesn't mean they've got a mind control ray. And all the other evidence is just self-serving marketing hype, right? It's stuff that Google and Facebook say to people who they hope will buy ads about how well those ads work. And that evidence is even thinner, right? And, one of the things we're learning through all these antitrust suits, particularly the one in Texas, is that they lie like crazy to advertisers. Like, ad fraud is off the hook crazy. Like, the ads are seen by no one. They're never displayed. Like the outcomes that are supposedly tracked through what's called attribution tracking are works of fiction. You have giant companies like eBay that cut $100 million worth of targeted ad spending and saw no change to their sales figures. Also giant packaged good companies like Procter and Gamble that just they just eliminate all their digital ad spend and nothing changes in their sales. That really suggests that these stories are overblown. But big tech, I think, does cause us to change our behavior, but they don't do it by persuading us. They do it by monopolizing us, right? So like when all your friends are on Facebook, and when Facebook blocks all interoperability, the only way to talk to your friends is to join Facebook. So we join Facebook, right? And our friends are on Facebook because we're there, and we're there because our friends are there. We've all taken each other hostage, and we can't leave, right? And that's just monopolism. And when people do manage to leave, like millions of people left Facebook and went to Instagram, Facebook then just buys Instagram. So
Right.
back inside of Facebook. You know, the fact that like everyone who has a question answers it by typing it into Google means that Google has enormous influence over what we believe. Google maintains its dominance as a search engine by spending billions and billions of dollars to exclude rivals, right? The one deal that Google and Apple's CEOs do in person, Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai do in person every year, is the deal where Google gives billions of dollars to Apple to be the default search option on Apple's devices. So, you know, there's just no way to escape. So these are just monopolistic tactics. These are things that were banned, you know, under the successive American administrations from the New Deal until the Reagan era. And then Reagan repealed them, and every president since, both Democratic and Republican, has made those rules even weaker. And you have companies like Google that have made 1.5 successful products, where they made a search engine and a pretty good Hotmail clone, that are nevertheless dominating multiple sectors by acquiring nascent competitors and merging with major competitors, both of those being activities that were traditionally prohibited under antitrust law. You know, if Google hadn't been allowed to buy its competitors, it would have no YouTube, it would have no ad tech stack, it would have no mobile product, right? It tried all of those things, it failed, right? Its internal versions of those things were disasters. The things that it does that are successful are things that it buys from someone else. You know, it can't make a Wi-Fi balloon, it can't make an RSS reader, it can't make a social network. All it can do is buy those firms. So access to the capital markets and excessive profits from monopoly are what allow it to dominate us. And so, you know, the reason that distinction matters is because if you believe Zuboff, then what we've got is like a comet hurtling towards the Earth. We don't want to break that comet up because it'll turn into like a killing meteor shower that will smash every city. So Zuboff says this, right? She says, if you break up the big ad tech surveillance platforms, you'll just end up with lots of people who have this ability to take away our free will. And so we can't use traditional anti-monopoly tactics. We have to instead try and steer the comet. We should turn them into like quasi-state-run entities, or maybe turn them into like something like AT&T, right? Regulated monopolies. But if you believe my hypothesis, then bringing out traditional antitrust enforcement and novel forms of antitrust enforcement that tech opens up, like mandating interoperability, as is countenanced in the US Access Act and the European Digital Markets Act and the UK Competition and Markets Authority proposals, that might actually get us somewhere, right? That we might actually be able to make these companies so weak that they can't dominate our policy, that maybe we could then pass a federal privacy bill with a private right of action that would make the kind of business that they're in illegal, which is what we really should do, because there's no way that they have our consent to do it. It inflicts major harm on us and on our society, and it's completely illegitimate. So you know, I agree with her that the surveillance is bad. I just disagree with her about why they do it, what they get out of it, and what we need to do about it.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to